I always thought our home was a sanctuary, a place where love and trust flourished. Emily and I had been married for 7 years, living in a cozy suburban house in a quiet neighborhood. We didn't have kids, but our 2 dogs, Max and Bella, filled our home with warmth and chaos. Life was good, or so I thought. Our home was a 2-story house with a garden that Emily adored. She spent hours tending to her flowers, and on weekends we'd sit on the porch, sipping coffee and talking about everything and nothing. The neighborhood was close-knit, with friendly neighbors who looked out for each other. It was the kind of place where you felt safe, where betrayal seemed like a distant nightmare. Emily worked as a marketing executive for a big firm downtown. She was smart, beautiful, and had a way of lighting up a room with her presence. I worked in IT, a steady job that allowed me to work from home most days. This setup gave me the flexibility to support Emily's career and take care of the house. Our evenings were typically spent cooking together, watching movies, or going for walks with the dogs. We had our share of disagreements like any couple, but we always found our way back to each other. I believed we had a strong foundation built on mutual respect and love. Little did I know, the cracks were already forming, invisible to my trusting eyes. Everything changed one rainy afternoon. I was in my home office, buried in work, when I heard Emily's phone buzz repeatedly in the living room. She had left it there when she went out to run errands. The incessant buzzing piqued my curiosity. Emily had always been protective of her phone, never leaving it out of her sight for long. This was unusual. I tried to ignore it, but the buzzing continued. Finally, I decided to take a quick break and see what was going on. As I approached the phone, I saw multiple notifications from a name I didn't recognize, David. My heart skipped a beat. Who was David, and why was he messaging my wife so frequently? Trying to dismiss the gnawing feeling in my gut, I reasoned that it could be work-related. Emily often communicated with clients and colleagues, but something about the frequency and timing of the messages felt off. I decided to confront her later, hoping it was just a misunderstanding. Emily returned home a couple of hours later, drenched from the rain but smiling as she carried bags of groceries. I forced a smile, helping her unpack while my mind raced with questions. We went through our usual evening routine, but I couldn't shake the unease. When we finally settled on the couch to watch a movie, I mustered the courage to bring it up. Emily, who is David? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Her reaction was immediate and defensive. Why are you asking about him? She snapped, her eyes narrowing. I saw his messages on your phone. They seemed frequent, I replied, trying to stay calm. She rolled her eyes and huffed. He's just a colleague, nothing more. You're being paranoid. But her reaction didn't sit right with me. Emily was usually open about her work and friends. This defensiveness was out of character. I didn't press further, not wanting to start a fight, but the seed of doubt had been planted. As we watched the movie, her laughter sounded hollow, and I felt a growing chasm between us. In the days that followed, I became more observant. Emily's behavior was subtly different. She was more secretive with her phone, often stepping out of the room to take calls or respond to messages. She started working late more frequently, claiming she had deadlines to meet. I wanted to trust her, but my instincts told me something was wrong. I decided to confide in my best friend, Mike. Over beers at our favorite bar, I laid out my suspicions. Mike listened patiently, his brow furrowing as I spoke. Man, I hope you're wrong, he said finally. But if you're not, you need to find out the truth. I nodded, knowing he was right. Ignoring the problem wouldn't make it go away. I had to know what was going on, even if it meant uncovering something that could shatter my world. And so, I embarked on a journey I never thought I'd take, seeking the truth about the woman I loved and the life we had built together. A week later, I decided to follow Emily. She had mentioned another late night at the office, and my gut told me to dig deeper. I left the house shortly after she did, keeping a safe distance as I tailed her car. My heart pounded with every turn, my mind racing with 1,000 possibilities. Instead of heading downtown, Emily drove to a park on the outskirts of the city. It was a secluded spot, not the kind of place you'd expect someone to go after work. I parked a few spaces away, my pulse quickening as I watched her get out of the car and walk towards the park's entrance. I followed on foot, staying hidden behind the trees. As I crept closer, I saw her stop by a bench under a large oak tree. A man was already there, waiting for her. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized him. It was David, her boss. They greeted each other with a hug, and then, to my horror, she kissed him. It wasn't a friendly peck on the cheek. It was a deep, passionate kiss. Rage and betrayal surged through me, turning my vision red. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms as I watched the woman I loved betray me in the most intimate way. All the late nights, the secretive phone calls, the defensiveness. It all made sense now. She wasn't just working late. She was meeting her lover, her boss. I couldn't stand by and watch any longer. Without thinking, I stormed towards them, my anger giving me strength. They broke apart as they saw me approaching, Emily's eyes widening in shock and fear. "Jason, what are you doing here?" she stammered, stepping back. "I could ask you the same thing," I growled, my gaze shifting to David. "But I think I already know the answer." David, clearly not expecting a confrontation, tried to step in front of Emily protectively. "Listen, man, it's not what it looks like," he started, but I was beyond reasoning. Without a word, I swung at him, my fist connecting with his jaw with a satisfying crack. He stumbled back, clutching his face as Emily screamed. The sound of her voice barely registered as I tackled him to the ground, my fists flying in a blind rage. "Jason, stop!" Emily yelled, trying to pull me off him. But I was unstoppable, fueled by months of suspicion and betrayal. David managed to land a few punches, but my anger gave me the upper hand. I hit him again and again, my knuckles splitting and bleeding. It wasn't until I felt Emily's hands on my shoulders, pulling me back with all her strength, that I finally stopped. Breathing heavily, I stood up, looking down at David. His face was a mess of blood and bruises, and he groaned in pain. Emily stepped between us, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and anger. "How could you?" she cried, tears streaming down her face. "How could I?" I echoed, my voice shaking with fury. "How could you, Emily? How could you do this to us? To me?" She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. I shook my head, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. I turned and walked away, not trusting myself to stay any longer. Behind me, I heard Emily sobbing and David groaning, but I didn't look back. I drove home in a daze, my mind numb. The image of Emily kissing David played on a loop in my head, each repetition cutting deeper. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I felt like a hollow shell, the anger replaced by a profound sadness. Inside the house, I collapsed onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. The reality of what had happened hit me like a freight train. Emily, my wife, the woman I had vowed to love and cherish, had betrayed me. And now, I had to figure out what to do next. The house felt eerily quiet as I sat on the couch, my mind reeling from the confrontation at the park. The weight of Emily's betrayal pressed down on me, and I knew I couldn't stay in this limbo. I needed to take action, to reclaim some semblance of control over my shattered life. With a grim determination, I decided it was time for Emily to leave. I went upstairs to our bedroom and began collecting her things. Each item I touched felt like a small betrayal, a reminder of the life we had built together and the lies she had spun. I yanked open drawers and pulled out her clothes, tossing them into a large garbage bag. Her jewelry, her makeup, even her favorite books. Everything went into the bag with a growing sense of finality. As I worked, my emotions swung wildly between anger and sadness. I found myself questioning every moment of our marriage, wondering how long she had been deceiving me. Was it just with David, or were there others? The thought made me sick to my stomach, and I pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. Once I had gathered all of her personal belongings, I dragged the bag downstairs and out to the curb. The physical act of throwing her things away felt oddly therapeutic, as if I was purging her lies from my life. I went back inside and began looking for anything else that belonged to her. Every photo, every memento, everything that reminded me of her went into the trash. The house looked bare and desolate by the time I was done, but I felt a small measure of relief. I wasn't done yet. I went to the front door and opened it, waiting for her to come back. Emily arrived a couple of hours later. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. She stepped into the house hesitantly, as if sensing the change in the air. "Jason, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. I shook my head, my expression hard. "There's nothing to talk about, Emily. Pack whatever's left and get out." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life," I replied, crossing my arms. I saw you with him, Emily. I saw everything. You betrayed me, and now you're going to face the consequences. She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. Don't even try to lie your way out of this. I know the truth. I saw you kiss him. I beat the crap out of him. And now, I'm done with you. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to step closer. Jason, please, it's not what you think. I made a mistake, but we can work through this. I love you. Love? I scoffed, my voice rising. Is that what you call sneaking around behind my back? Is that what you call kissing your boss in the park? Don't talk to me about love, Emily. You don't know the first thing about it. She sobbed harder, her shoulders shaking. I was lonely, Jason. You were always working, always busy. I needed someone to talk to, someone who made me feel wanted. And you thought fucking your boss was the answer? I shouted, the anger boiling over. You could have talked to me, Emily. You could have told me how you felt, but instead you chose to betray me. You chose to destroy our marriage. She sank to her knees, crying uncontrollably. I'm sorry, Jason. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't cut it, I said coldly. You need to leave. Now. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. Please, Jason, don't do this. I have nowhere to go. That's not my problem, I replied, my voice hard. You should have thought about that before you decided to cheat. Now pack your things and get out. With a final sob, she got up and stumbled upstairs to gather the rest of her belongings. I watched her go, my heart aching despite my resolve. I heard her moving around, the sounds of drawers opening and closing, the occasional sniffle as she packed. When she came back down, she was carrying a small suitcase, her face a mask of misery. She paused at the door, looking back at me one last time. Jason, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. You did hurt me, Emily. More than you'll ever know, I said, my voice breaking. Now go. She stepped out into the night, and I closed the door behind her. As the latch clicked into place, I felt a mix of sorrow and relief. The woman I had loved, the woman I had shared my life with, was gone. And now, I had to figure out how to pick up the pieces and move forward. The days that followed Emily's departure were a blur of anger, pain, and a relentless drive for revenge. The betrayal had cut deep, and I couldn't shake the need to make her and David pay for what they had done. Emily might have been out of the house, but the scars she left behind were fresh and raw, fueling my need for retribution. I started by gathering all the evidence I had collected over the past few weeks. The messages I had copied from her phone, the GPS tracker logs, and the photos I had taken at the park. Each piece of evidence was a reminder of the deceit and the lies, but it also gave me a sense of purpose. I was going to expose them both for what they were. First, I focused on David. I knew that taking him down would hit Emily where it hurt. He was her boss, the man she had risked everything for. I spent hours researching his background, digging up every piece of dirt I could find. It turned out he had a history of questionable behavior, which I planned to use to my advantage. I set up an anonymous email account and started sending out the evidence to David's superiors and the company's HR department. I made sure to include detailed descriptions of his affair with Emily, attaching the photos and message logs as proof. I knew that this scandal would not only tarnish his reputation, but could potentially cost him his job. Within a week, I received confirmation that my plan was working. David was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. The company couldn't ignore the overwhelming evidence, and it was only a matter of time before they took further action. Knowing that I had disrupted his life brought a grim satisfaction. But I wasn't done yet. Next, I turned my attention to Emily. She had been staying with a friend, but I knew she relied heavily on her job for financial stability. I decided to make sure she felt the consequences of her actions in every aspect of her life. I anonymously sent the same evidence to her company's HR department, knowing that an affair with a superior would violate their code of conduct. The fallout was swift. Emily was called into a meeting with HR and confronted with the evidence. She was suspended while they conducted their investigation. I knew that even if she managed to keep her job, her reputation would be in shambles. The thought of her facing the consequences of her betrayal gave me a twisted sense of justice. But my revenge didn't stop there. I wanted to make sure everyone in our social circle knew the truth. I sent out emails to our mutual friends and family, detailing the affair and attaching the damning evidence. I wanted to isolate her, to make sure she had no support left to lean on. The reactions were mixed. Some people expressed their shock and disbelief, others their sympathy. A few reached out to me, offering support and condemning Emily's actions. It felt good to have people on my side, to know that I wasn't alone in this nightmare. But it also brought an unexpected consequence: guilt. As the days turned into weeks, I began to feel the weight of my actions. I had succeeded in ruining David's career and tarnishing Emily's reputation, but it didn't bring the closure I had hoped for. The anger that had driven me was slowly replaced by an emptiness that I couldn't fill. I realized that revenge, no matter how justified, couldn't heal the wounds left by betrayal. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Emily standing on the doorstep, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked like a shadow of the confident woman I once knew. "Jason, please, can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, torn between my lingering anger and a deep-seated need for closure. After a moment, I stepped aside and let her in. She stood in the hallway, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. "I know you hate me," she began, her voice shaking. "And I don't blame you. I've lost my job, my friends, everything. But I need you to understand why it happened." I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. "Go on." She took a deep breath, her eyes filling with tears. "I was lonely, Jason. You were always so focused on work, on providing for us. I felt invisible, like I didn't matter anymore. David made me feel seen, appreciated. But it was a mistake. A terrible mistake. I know that now." I wanted to shout at her, to tell her that her excuses didn't matter. But instead I found myself asking, "Why didn't you talk to me? Why didn't you tell me how you felt?" She wiped her tears, looking down at the floor. "I was afraid you'd see it as a weakness, that you'd think less of me. And by the time I realized how wrong I was, it was too late." Silence filled the room as I processed her words. The anger that had fueled my revenge was still there, but it was tempered by a profound sadness. I had loved her once, and despite everything, a part of me still cared. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Emily," I said finally, my voice heavy with emotion. "But I need to move on. We both do." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. I'm so sorry, Jason. For everything." With that, she turned and left, the door closing softly behind her. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door, feeling the weight of the past few months lift ever so slightly. The road to healing was long, but I had taken the first step. And for now, that was enough. Deciding to get a divorce was both the hardest and easiest decision I had ever made. The betrayal had irreparably damaged our relationship, and there was no going back. I contacted Marcia, my lawyer, and she swiftly began the process. Emily was served with divorce papers, and thus began the long, arduous journey through the legal system. The trial was set for a few months later. During that time, I tried to focus on rebuilding my life. I delved deeper into my work, spent time with friends, and even took up a few hobbies to keep my mind occupied. The nights were the hardest, filled with restless sleep and haunting memories of better times. When the day of the trial arrived, I felt a mix of anxiety and relief. This was the final step in severing the ties that had once bound us together. I dressed in a suit, determined to face this challenge with dignity and strength. The courtroom was cold and impersonal, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil that had led us here. Emily sat on the other side, looking fragile and worn. Our lawyers exchanged formalities, and the proceedings began. Marcia presented our case with a calm professionalism that I envied. She laid out the evidence of Emily's infidelity, the impact it had on our marriage, and our financial situation. Emily's lawyer, in turn, tried to paint a picture of her as a victim of neglect, someone who had made a mistake out of loneliness and desperation. As I listened to the arguments, I felt a pang of guilt. Despite everything, a part of me still cared about Emily. I had loved her for so long that it was hard to see her in pain, even if she had caused mine. But I knew that this was necessary, that we both needed to move on. When it was my turn to testify, I spoke honestly about our marriage, the betrayal, and the impact it had on me. I didn't hold back, but I also tried to be fair. Emily had made terrible choices, but I acknowledged that I hadn't been the perfect husband either. There were times when my focus on work had caused me to neglect her needs, and I had to own up to that. Emily's testimony was a tearful recount of her loneliness and regret. She apologized repeatedly, both to me and to the court, but it didn't change the facts. The judge listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions, but remained impassive throughout. After several hours, the trial concluded. The judge took a brief recess to deliberate, and when she returned, her verdict was swift and decisive. The divorce was granted, and the division of assets was outlined. I would keep the house and most of our savings, while Emily would receive a smaller settlement. It was a fair decision, one that reflected the circumstances and the betrayal. As we left the courtroom, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The legal ties that had bound us were finally severed, and I was free to start anew. Emily approached me in the hallway, her eyes filled with tears. "Jason, I just wanted to say goodbye," she said softly. "I hope you find happiness." "I truly do." I nodded, unsure of what to say. "Take care, Emily. I hope you find peace." With that, she turned and walked away, and I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of sadness and hope. The chapter of my life with Emily was closed, but a new one was just beginning. I left the courthouse and stepped into the bright afternoon sun. The world seemed a little lighter, a little more vibrant. I took a deep breath and started walking, ready to embrace whatever the future held. The journey had been painful and difficult, but I had emerged stronger. It was time to look forward, to rebuild, and to find a new path in life. The months following the divorce were a period of profound transformation. I moved back into the house, a place that had once been a home filled with love and memories, now a symbol of resilience and renewal. The walls no longer whispered secrets of betrayal. Instead, they echoed with the sounds of a man determined to rebuild his life. My days became a blend of work and self-discovery. I threw myself into my job, taking on new projects and responsibilities. The focus helped, but I knew that healing required more than just distraction. I began to reconnect with old friends, rebuilding relationships that had been neglected during my marriage. Their support was a lifeline, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this journey. One of the first major steps I took was redecorating the house. I wanted to erase the remnants of our past, to create a space that was entirely my own. I painted the walls, replaced the furniture, and filled the rooms with things that brought me joy. It was therapeutic, a way of reclaiming my environment and my sense of self. I also started attending a support group for people who had gone through similar experiences. Sharing my story with others who understood my pain was incredibly cathartic. Listening to their stories, I realized that betrayal was a wound that could heal with time and effort. We were all broken in our own ways, but we were also on the path to becoming whole again. One evening, after a particularly uplifting group session, I decided to take a walk in the park where I had discovered Emily's betrayal. It seemed fitting to confront the place that had marked the beginning of the end. As I walked, I noticed how beautiful the park was, the way the setting sun cast a golden glow over the trees and the lake. It was a stark contrast to the darkness I had felt that day. I found a bench by the water and sat down, watching the ducks glide across the surface. It was peaceful, a moment of clarity amidst the chaos. As I sat there, I realized that I had been given a second chance, a chance to redefine myself and my future. Determined to embrace this opportunity, I started exploring new hobbies. I took up photography, capturing the beauty of the world around me. It gave me a new perspective, a way to see life through a different lens. I also joined a hiking group, immersing myself in nature and the camaraderie of fellow enthusiasts. Each hike was a step towards healing, a reminder that there was a world beyond my pain. It was during one of these hikes that I met Sarah. She was a fellow photographer, with a passion for capturing the essence of the natural world. We started talking, first about our shared interests, and then about our lives. She had her own story of heartbreak, and we found solace in each other's company. Sarah and I began spending more time together, exploring new trails and photographing the beauty we discovered. Our connection grew stronger, built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. She didn't try to fix me, and I didn't try to fix her. We were two broken people, finding strength in each other's presence. As our relationship blossomed, I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't thought possible. Sarah's kindness and patience were a balm to my wounded soul. She taught me that it was okay to trust again, to let someone in despite the fear of getting hurt. With her, I felt a sense of hope and possibility. One evening, as we sat by a campfire on a remote trail, I looked at Sarah and realized how far I had come. The journey from betrayal to this moment had been long and arduous, but it had also been transformative. I had found a new sense of purpose, a new appreciation for life's simple pleasures, and a new love that felt genuine and true. "I'm grateful for you, Sarah," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. She smiled, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "I'm grateful for you too, Jason. We've both come a long way." We sat in silence, the crackling of the fire and the sounds of the forest surrounding us. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of peace. The past was behind me, and the future was filled with promise. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, I knew that this was just the beginning of my new life. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. The journey of healing was ongoing, but with each step, I was moving forward. And for the first time in a long while, I was excited about what lay ahead.